Hi, everybody. It's been a Friday, and what can I say? I mean, if Google did everything it was supposed to do, then it wouldn't be a surprise, right? So thanks everybody for hanging in for a few minutes while we got everything going. I'm Kathy Klotz-Guest of Keeping It Human. Welcome to the Improv and Innovation Cafe. This is our third episode, and we are talking to the fabulous Mike Bonifer. So let me tell you a little bit about him before we get started. I got my little cheat sheet because he's done so many things, but we're going to try to sum up all the coolness in 2 sentences, which is hard to do, but we can do it. He's the co-founder of BigSTOry, and BigSTOry helps clients improve performance using something known as quantum storytelling. So we're definitely going to ask Mike about that. What quantum storytelling is, in a nutshell, is it's about how stories live in networks and influence behaviors. And we're going to talk a lot about big data. And I think the burning question that I think we're going to hopefully answer today, and I have to just say it, right? Everybody's thinking it, is do these pants make my data look big? Because everybody's thinking about that joke. So it's Friday, we have to have a little levity before we start.
I don't think there's room in anybody's pants for big data. I think that's part of the problem with big data. There's just not enough room in our pants for big data.
There's a tweetable moment, Mike Bonifer. There's not enough room in our pants for big data. So, and
the skinny jeans will not suffice.
They will not suffice. This is one time where you want to look, big in those jeans. You want everything to, you don't want to have the skinny jeans.
That's right.
Okay, so what's been your favorite part of the week? Just before we get into all the serious stuff, let's have a little moment of levity. And what's been your favorite part of the week, Mike?
My favorite part of the week was Tuesday night blues. No, actually last night. Last night, my wife and I went to see the premiere of a film called Can You Dig It? Which profiles 5 gangster gardeners from South Central Los Angeles, urban gardeners of different ages, different walks of life, but all from South Central. And their lives in urban gardening over the course of a year. And our friend Ron Finley, the gangster gardener, the philosopher king of gangster gardeners, who gave a really memorable TED Talk in 2013 that I had a small part in coaching him on, was the central character in the film. So we did that, and it was as glitzy as urban gardening gets, I do believe. So real Hollywood premiere, part of the LA Film Festival. Ron was there, John Legend was there, Marissa Tomei was there. So, we felt we got to play that we're in Hollywood game for a little while, yeah. Well, and it was about gardening, which was fantastic.
That's pretty darn cool. That's actually a very cool kind of gangster gardening kind of mashup, and I love starting with that because it's a great story. And yesterday I was at Funny Biz and the Funny Business Conference in San Francisco, so I was kind of swimming in my tribe, and it was all about humor and storytelling, and that's I think a great segue into talking about today's topic, because big data is about, I think it's about the promise of being able to tell stories in real time for customers and prospects. And I thought, Mike, we could start off without being too jargony. If I get jargony, I'm going to have to kick my own ass later.
You have jargoneria, I noticed. In your history, jargoneria. Wow.
I do. Well, it was my way of making fun of. I'm paying a little bit of a little homage to the fact that I came out of high tech where we were swimming in it. So we're going to try to keep that to a minimum today. Can you talk a little bit about, just to frame it for everybody, what is big data and what's the promise of it for companies? Why do they care?
Well, they care because data is what companies run on. It's the life's blood of every organization, because ultimately it assesses your relationship with your customers, and if you don't have customers, you don't have a business. So we want as much information about that. I tend to use data and information interchangeably. And so I think it in terms of having the dashboard for the organization, data is what populates the dashboard. And managers need to be looking at that like like hedge fund managers need to be looking at financial markets. Managers of organizations need to be looking at what their employees are up to, where lead generation is coming from. What are the sources of innovation that you're tapping into? What are people reading? What do their social networks look like? And on and on and on and on and on. Those are the nerve endings of an organization. And that feedback comes at us and comes at companies in the form of data. And there's more of it, so it's bigger, and there still isn't room in our pants.
That's right. We need the post-Thanksgiving dinner pants, the elastic to fit all that data in.
Grandpa's Pants. Let's start a website, Grandpa's Pants. It'll be the new big data company. There's room for your big data in Grandpa's Pants.
Oh, God. All right, I gotta quickly look and see if that URL is taken.
I think there'll be a Grandpa's Pants server farm in the Philippines by the time this Hangout is over.
Oh, there's going to be a lot of URLs. People are checking that out. But I love that you talk about that, because I think that's a really important point for people to understand. And the way I understand it is that if companies can better understand what their prospects and their customers are doing and what they're looking at, what they're talking about, who they're talking to, we can go and be part of the story that's out there. And
correct.
And I think the old world, the current world actually, because a lot of companies aren't even living up to the promise of big data, is that they're using it to mine information on their website, their customers, their prospects. But I think, and this is where I want you to kind of talk about the quantum storytelling concept. If I understand it correctly, you're proposing a different world where companies go out and rather than push the story, their company story on people, they can see where the stories their customers care about are happening and what's percolating and what are people engaging in, and then go be part of the story wherever those stories are relevant and where they're happening.
You should come work for us, because that's better than I pitch it. So
I'm trying to keep it human over here.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the pitch. No, that's it. I mean, we live in a world of stories, as you know. All of us storytellers, and I would say the table stakes to get involved with BigSTOry and what we do is that you need to be an accomplished storyteller. We don't want to get into the business of explaining the hero's journey or trying to push books on you to teach you 3-act structure and cinematic structure and explain who Kurosawa was. And we need, we work with story experts. And so this is for me, as someone who's been in storytelling my entire life, we all come from the basis of belief that stories are the ultimate cognitive tool that human beings are given, as you said at the top of this. And what quantum storytelling has given us, and BigSTOry as its first commercial practitioners, is a way of thinking about how stories live in the world. Like, the table stakes is knowing how to tell a story, how to spin a yarn, how to understand what is the beginning of a story or the end of another one, or how the end of one is the beginning of another one, and all of that sort of thing. That's part of the tools that we require in order to move into this new model. Yeah. And at that point, it really takes off, because then you break out of the data, the purely data translations of story. You don't rely on information alone. You rely on things like meta language and emotion. And instead of looking for stories in data, which my contention is what most data analysts do, who talk about story, is they are finding stories in the data. So they are creating relationships. And I say creating, not presenting relationships that exist. They are creating relationships in the data and presenting them to their clients as stories. And that is perfectly legitimate. That is a story. The problem with that is there are infinitely many stories in large data sets. And so in terms of the quantum aspect, and I'm sorry to get deep on this, but I warned everybody. I think I warned you. I know you understand. As far as I can tell, we're the only two on this, so I'm just having the conversation. In terms of that, there are too many. Then you create ambiguity. There's VUCA in large data sets: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And when it comes to storytelling, that's where the ambiguity comes in, because you will get two different data analysts creating two different stories that can be contradictory with one another. So as a manager, it quickly reverts to with so much data, it quickly reverts to subjective calls again, which is what people were doing when there wasn't enough data. So interestingly, the old school subjectivity of, well, I don't have enough data on this, so I'm going to go with my gut, has been supplanted by, well, there's so much data on this that I could hear 5 different things from my 5 different managers. I'm going to ask my wife tonight at dinner, and whatever she says, that's what we're going to do. So what is a better way of making sense of that data? Well, it's to develop a theory about story and test the theory about story and use the data that the story generates as a better data set than just delving into that data set and saying, here's a story, it's a pattern, look, it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, it's going to end happily, this is the 2-year projection, look. There, you can't rely on that. Yeah. So is this making sense?
Yeah, let's anchor it in something that people can get their arms around, and I'm a big believer in examples. Sure. Is there an example, Mike? Because I know you are so intimately familiar with this stuff. You live in it every day. For those not really familiar with it, is there an example you can talk about that people go, I get it?
Well, rather than, I could do some of our case studies, and I'm sure we'll get around to those. Well, let's go back to Ron Finley as an example. So there, it's a very local example, and then I'll use one from Procter Gamble. So let's talk local first, and then let's talk global, because both things are at play here. So Ron Finley is a gardener. He's actually wasn't even a gardener. He was part of my urban gardening group that we both belonged to, and we planted edible gardens in South Central Los Angeles, where we both live. And when it came time for him to plant his garden, he planted it in a place where the city said you're not supposed to have edible gardens, the parkway between the sidewalk and the street. About 8 feet wide and 100 feet long strip of land next to his house.
We lost you, Mike.
You lost me?
There we go. We lost your audio for a second.
Okay, sorry. So he planted a garden where you weren't supposed to. Now, in terms of what we do, we call that the game. And our approach to this mode of storytelling is to use game structure, improvised game structure, as story engines. So you make these bets on games at the beginning of the process. So Ron came up with a game. I'm going to plant a garden where you're not supposed to. At that point, there are no, and this can scale, so I would ask anybody that's listening that's dealing with a different problem to just contextualize this in your own problem at the beginning of any process. Innovation process, branding, marketing, any of that. At this stage, he had an objective, which was to plant a garden in a space that was illegal according to the city, and to provoke the city. There was a part of that was, to test the ordinance, so to speak. So that was all he had. There was no idea beyond that about what it might become. In the 2.5 years since he did that, it has become a global phenomenon. This gardener and his garden have become known all over the world. He's one of the leading lights of that whole movement. He's asked to speak everywhere. It has generated a lot of income for him. He is being asked to endorse things and become part of partnerships in urban gardening movements and permaculture movements. And none of that could have been, and just stories galore. So there's a lot of story energy out there around urban gardening, as most people know. What was missing was a gangster gardener. There was nobody playing that role. And so he was able to participate authentically using this game structure, and it just kept paying off and paying off. And we like to say that the objective is different from the outcomes. And so the objective in doing what he did to begin the story was very focused, but it was going to be different from what the outcomes were going to be. Let's see what happens. Let's start this thing and see what happens. See what stories emerge. So literally millions of stories, including this great TED Talk in 2013, which has over 2 million views. So out of that garden tens of millions of impressions, of fresh awareness of Ron Finley, of redefinition of his own career, his own path in life, has been hugely productive. And it will scale for any brand that is willing to start at very low stakes and try a lot of things, be improvisational with the intention of generating stories of positive outcomes. So that's the small scale.
Okay, so just to kind of encapsulate it in a way that people can get their arms around, and correct, please jump in if I've misunderstood. My understanding is part of the gaming up front is that it's looking at conversations out there. It's looking at, all right, here's what's happening in the world of gardening and urban gardening. Is it saying, hey, there's nobody talking about it from this angle of a gangster gardener, therefore there's a space to be filled out there in the stories that are being told? Or does it say, look, there's a little bit of that happening here, we think that that's where you should double down? So how does it look at the stories that are out there? Here's the story you could create, and then advise you as to how to map that gap.
So it's really about matching. It's like a matching engine, think match.com, because it's not just the story energy that's out there and you see an opportunity. That's purely opportunistic. So in looking at Ron's case, yes, he had a commercial sense. He had a career as a fashion designer, about 20 years doing fashion design, until big pants were no longer popular. And then, that did him in with the skinny jeans after that.
Skinny jeans does everybody in.
He made pants that there's room for a lot of data in his pants. So it came, anyhow, so certainly he had an entrepreneur's sense that this was something that was happening. He was taking classes himself. He was preparing for this because he sensed that this was a movement, solar sustainability. Let me check it out. I have to reinvent myself. The other component to it that was equally important and probably is more sustaining and is the better part of the matching is that he understood that young African-American men, and African-American men generally, had a stigma associated with using tools in the soil that went back to slavery in the United States. And he wanted to break that cycle. He said that I have to make it cool. It has to be artful. It's got to be. And so this idea of being gangster really was born of, being gangster with a shovel, as he calls it, was born of this idea that stigma is something that he wanted to personally work at erasing. So he was very personally motivated to do something about that. So it was really a matching between that personal mission and the commercial opportunity that has been so potent, I think, and really brings that other layer of meaning to the stories that come out of this. And it's the real meaning of the gangster thing. Like that's, it's not, and that's a point. It's not advertising. It's not brand positioning. That's part of the story.
Yeah.
That notion, the story came before anybody called him the gangster gardener. They didn't, he wasn't sitting around thinking up that phrase.
Yeah. He was being it. He was living it.
He was living the story, and we talk a lot about living stories with Big Story. We as opposed to stories about what happened in the past or stories predicting the future, which is really where data lives. This idea of the game mechanism and the improvisation live in the present, as you know. So the closer we can get to the present moment, the better decisions are going to be, because that's the data you have to work with. It's going to change in a heartbeat. There'll be new projections, new things happening, but if you can stay in the present, that will give you your best odds.
It's absolutely fascinating to me, this idea, because I think, well, we've talked a lot about authenticity, and this is a great way to say, all right, here's who you are in the world. Maybe here's where some opportunities are that really there's a moment and a place for somebody like you. So it's not a fabricated brand story, as a lot of this brand storytelling is very superficial, but this is a real who you are. Here's what people care about. Here's where you have a chance, game theory, here's some opportunities where you might have a chance.
Right.
And then it matches up. Here's the communities or the areas, or I don't even know if it goes down to the networks level or the social networks level. Get involved in these conversations over here because that's where you should be. If it's that kind of matching engine, that's amazing.
It happens at every level. So that's why the quantumness is important, is
the ratio of quantumness.
Before they're stories, I mean, before they're even stories, they are conversations, or they are slight connections, or connections at a distance. I ended up getting involved with, it is really a big story case study, but the rescue of the Chilean miners in 2010 was a big deal for me. And I ended up working with somebody that wrote a book about that rescue, who lives down in Argentina, Chile, Santiago. Jonathan Franklin and I ended up working together, and it was the most distant of connections, but it was through improvisation. And I had been blogging about the miners' rescue while watching it from a great distance, reading about it in The Guardian and not even knowing who Jonathan Franklin was. He was the only print journalist that had full access to the rescue site of the miners, where the miners were trapped, and in Copiapo. And I'm blogging about it, and when it was all over, I just had one question. There was a piece of the story that was incomplete, and it was my curiosity as a storyteller. And you talk about something that's missing, where you can jump in. The question I had was, how did the miners all come out of that mine when they were rescued wearing Oakley sunglasses? And I just go, there's something here. There's a story about this. Like, something happened to get brand new Oakley sunglasses on those miners, and nobody's talking about it. So I decided to find out. And it turns out that Jonathan Franklin, this journalist, was from Boston originally, went to Brown University, and sold sunglasses when he was in college. And there came a time during the rescue when the Chilean Navy was going to put tinted goggles on these guys. And he said, he was covering the meeting. And he goes, what about good sunglasses? And they go, what are you talking about? And he goes, like Oakley's. And they go, we don't know how to do that. And he said, what if I take care of the glasses? And they said, okay. The Chilean Navy, God bless them. And Oakley, he put Oakley in touch with the Navy, the Chilean Navy, and it generated $40 million in earned media, that exposure for Oakley.
Wow.
Without them having to do a thing other than ship 35 pairs of Oakleys down there. 33 for the miners and 2 for the other 2 that went down. And then Jonathan Franklin, when he's telling me all this, he goes, hey, I read your blog post about the improvisation and the game theory that the miners used. He goes, that's the best description I've read of what they did to stay alive. We should work together. And so within like a month of the miners being rescued, Jonathan Franklin and I had created a program which we sold called Where Are You Stuck?, which we sold to businesses, and we'll probably do at some point in the future again, but it was use the allegory of the miners' rescue to talk about businesses or individuals who feel stuck. And what do you do that the miners did to get out of a tight spot, to work with constrained resources, to change roles to suit a crisis? All of those things. It was a beautiful program. So he and I are talking about reviving it this year because the movie with Antonio Banderas about the rescue is going to come out. And so we want to hop on that train, of course.
Interesting. Timing, right? I mean, before we get to the big kind of case study, which I would love to hear, I want to sort of circle back to a little bit of this idea of, we talk about real-time storytelling and being where the stories are. That is in itself an act of improvisation because, I mean, real time, that's what improv is. Is there any other ways in which improv tools or improv games or exercises are applied to the work that you do in terms of, the quantumness ratio of it all? Is there, what's that other intersection with improv other than it's just that it's improvisational and real time?
So one is game, and most improvisers can tell you what a game is, although we have our own proprietary definition because most improvisers can't write a definition. We all know what the game of a scene is, but
Yeah.
we have a definition. It's ergo, E-R-G-O, environment, roles, guidelines, objective. And so we use that as a story engine. We use themes to define what we call story clouds. So that will be the Procter Gamble case study that I'll tell you about. It's one everybody's familiar with. So theme is what they used to connect many stories in real time and to not have to author the majority of those stories. So we can talk about that. And then we use all the tools. We use a lot of warm-up activities and pure play to get our clients in the mindset that this is play. It's serious play. It's play with a purpose, as my friends at Highlights Magazine for Children have on the cover. I actually know those people. I actually went to the place where Highlights Magazine for Children is published, Honesdale, Pennsylvania, and it is exactly how you'd expect it would be. It is exactly what you'd expect.
I just think it's a giant dental office somewhere that's publishing it.
Well, I think that's the front, and then you walk through the back, and you and all of a sudden it's full of, you know, like old Disney characters and crusty teachers who are hilarious in their own way, and people teaching handwriting and scientists and whatnot. It's really and it's all in these houses in Honesdale. So they've taken over like a bunch of houses, and so you'll go in one house and it'll be the Zahner Bloser handwriting company. So it's like the last people in the world that are teaching cursive handwriting and English are working on perfect R's. You know, is there a big move that's going to be made on the R this year in handwriting or whatever? And they're talking about that. And then the professor emeritus taught me how to, he goes, do you know what story I really liked that we did? It was called Ben Can Do 10. And he actually talked like Ed Wynn from, you know, the Mary Poppins or the old Disney movies. It was called Ben Can Do 10. And he was a boy named Ben, and he didn't have any skills that he knew of, but he found that he could catch the quarters that were on the back of your arm, and he was able to do 10. And so we all started talking with the old professor about how many we could do, and then we ended up all doing it in his office where quarters were flying, and that was Highlights Magazine for Children. So anyhow, back to what we do with improvisation. So we do levels of play with a purpose, that's the openness, games, themes, and then we also use a lot of an activity we call levels of meaning, or a lot of a process called levels of meaning. And this gets back to where data fits in. So we contend, our process contends that there are 3 levels of all human communication: information, emotion, and meta language. And that it's an amalgam of those levels of meaning that we use to communicate in different contexts. So, for example, if you look at an elephant, there's a lot of information about an elephant, and in certain zoological contexts, you would call on that information. What's the gestation period? What's the average lifespan? What's the diet? You know, is it African or Indian elephant? All of that is data about the elephant. There's also emotions associated with the elephant. So elephants can be funny. Elephants are maternal. They're caring. They work in herds. That is going to be of interest to you if you're creating characters based on elephants, or working on a campaign to save the elephant. You can't just cite data. You have to remind us of why these are beautiful animals, and that gets into the emotion. And then the meta level uses the elephant as a symbol or an allegory for something. So the Republican Party, anything large, anything to do with the circus. Dumbo will stand in for all the baby elephants in the world. So all of those levels together can be used in, and it's the important thing, because we, in a networked environment, we are always contextualizing. We're always working toward context. Content is not a problem. We have a lot of storytellers out there and a lot of people that are skilled. The challenge is, are you contextualizing? Are you connecting with the audience on a level where the audience is already living?
Yeah.
So those are three big ones for us. Four actually. So, you know.
Yeah, well said. No, I'm fascinated. It's a really interesting topic because I think you hit it on the head. It's, you know, there's so much data out there. So data, we talked about no skinny jeans. We need big jeans because there is a lot of data. And I think the statistic I heard, Mike, from Google itself was about every 2 years, the amount of content just in Google that they index doubles.
Right.
So we're at that rate of speed of information, but what we don't have is we're lacking, to your point, is that to make it meaningful. We have data, but that does not make it meaningful for human consumption. And that gap, bridging that gap is a part of, I think, the quantumness and really making that meaningful. And that's where I see the next wave of data having to go because, you know, I talk to companies all the time and I know you do as well. And it's never, we have a shortage of data. It's, we have too much of it, but not all that data is informational, actionable, and meaningful. We don't even use most of the data that we're trying to get at because we don't know what to do with it.
Well, that's why looking for data in stories is much more effective than looking for stories in data. That the data in stories is automatically worth more because it is contextualized. We know where it's coming from. We understand who's participating in this, who's generating these numbers, and why, and how they're living their lives. Because somebody doesn't make a banking decision because 1.2% times 12 months plus 20 years equals X. They make a banking decision because I need to save money for my kids' college.
Yeah.
And those are two different calculations. And so, you know, our financial clients, we talk to them about that. And we go, you must meet people where they are living. And where they're living is, you know, and there's also, I want to point out this too about data and how it's applied. There's good research on retention of pure data versus data that's been contextualized with emotion. So you can look at journals of behavioral science and management studies, and I'm sure at Harvard Business Review you could find things like how do you increase retention or employee engagement, and so there's tests of we're gonna test by giving one group nothing but information, and then we'll give a second group that same information but couch it emotionally.
Yeah.
And you know, it's 40% better retention when there's an emotional connection. So why wouldn't customers think the same thing about you? And have much better retention and memory of your brand? And you know, as somebody said, I won't remember what you said, but I'll remember how you made me feel.
Right.
And so I think with story, we're working at how people feel and what we can do about that, and support their good moods and pull them out of their bad ones and give them hope and be gangsters in our own way. Gangster storytellers.
I love that. I tell you, gangster storytellers, quantumness, and skinny jeans.
We got it.
I think that sums it up. And I think that's so smart too, because you're right. You know, we're always looking for stories in the data, and we're not looking for data in the stories. And the first layer of meaning, the most important layer, is the emotional context. If we understand the emotional context for making decisions, then we can understand the data behind that. You know, Google did a study a couple of years ago with the corporate executive board, and they looked at decision making, and they found that even in B2B situations, and this is not a shock to me, that the emotional component had twice the weight in the overall decision to buy than rational value. Twice the weight, because if a product says it's going to do it and you can prove that it does, it's pretty binary. Check the box. It's going to do what it says it's going to do. It meets that minimum standard. But the emotional context for solving my problem and making my pain go away and making me look good, a hero to my organization, that emotional, I trust this company, those are off the charts. And the fact that it's twice has twice the effect in the overall decision to purchase was not shocking to me. But we have the data now. Google has the data to actually say, yeah, here's what it is.
Have you ever sat on a jury for a business plan competition,
Oh,
Kathy?
yes. Yes.
I love them because I don't do it very often, but when I do, I always notice this phenomenon. Like it's a bunch of hard asses looking at the numbers, and they're just looking at the numbers and they're paging through, and they can't wait to get to the 5-year projection.
How much am I going to make?
And they're going, yeah, now you got here at year 2 that your burn rate is going to be at 40% of what it was. And they're going like that through the whole thing. And then somebody will step up who's got kind of a crappy business plan and the numbers don't swing, but they're wearing their heart on their sleeve and they're going, it is International Youth Hostel Network, we're the youth of the world, you know, or whatever. And everybody's just like, ah, you know, and they're like, yeah, blue ribbon, you know, great job, and it's,
yeah.
I think there was a quote by Chris Sacca, the VC, that's going, good story beats a good spreadsheet every time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that really gets at the heart of, you know, where investments, large and small, go to pay off, whether the investment is a transaction for a product or whether it's a longer, you know, venture capital investment. Story beats spreadsheet. And it's not that you don't need both, but I think rebalancing that is super important because the spreadsheets are just out of hand.
There's no doubt about it. And, you know, you and I both have seen those, and I've looked at numbers where it's just pure extrapolation. And it's like, if we can get 1% of a $10 million market, and it's like, that math never works out. But you bring up something before we move on to the, and I don't want to forget, I want to come back to the Procter & Gamble case study, but I wanted to ask you this because I think this is such an important concept. I know that with big data, there's a tendency to associate it with big investment, big dollars, big pockets, big enterprise. And I think there's a lot of smaller businesses out there looking at big data and thinking, well, that doesn't apply to me, or how does it apply to me? How do we take advantage of what it could be, and how can we be more real-time responsive in understanding where to take our honest selves into the stories that are out there with our limited resources? So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think we have this myth going that, you know, more resources necessarily means better information. It may or may not be that way.
Yeah, there's always a balance, and not just between data and story, but in everything.
Yeah.
So the good news for all of this is that more and more data is becoming available at scale. So, and by scale, that doesn't just mean scale up, it means scale down. So we were just asked to help a restaurant, well, let me call it a food service in the Bay Area, and you know, that's a small piece of business. That's not Facebook or somebody big, but it's a pretty cool idea, and we would like to help out. And so they're going to have limited access to data, but we will have, as somebody that's working them, we'll have a lot of access to data. And one of the reasons that they're bringing us in is because my partner Jeremy Carnell is fantastic at tapping into big data and using it as needed. It is such a rich, multi-layered, multi-dimensional thing, and really BigSTOry is in response to it. If there's one thing that leads me to believe that BigSTOry is on the right path, it's we're simply trying to help in the big data world and be of service to people that are trying to make better sense of big data. So I think it's out there, it's big, and the bigness means you can carve off small pieces and nobody's going to miss it. And, you know, you're not, you know, and at the other end of this, so I think from a local standpoint, you can be very specific and create a lot of uniqueness. And I think that even groups with large data sets like the International Red Cross, Red Crescent, our friend Pablo Suarez, there, you know, they've got tons and tons and tons of data, but the question is what to do at the local level. And so I think, you know, their challenge is a little bit different. I think if you're starting local, you have a chance to go, I'm going to pick the data that's most likely to affect me in the future and what I want to happen in the future. And that's my freedom. I'm not saddled with, you look at, say, the GE Global Research Center in San Ramon, and which is about 1.5 years old, and I understand just gets data like you can't even believe from GE and everything. I mean, think how much data GE itself generates, and then the raw data that they are probably mandated to pull in that GE touches. What are you not going to cover? What data are you not looking at? So they're really two different problems that are part of the same animal, so to speak, two different parts of the elephant. It actually helps to be locally blind, because then you go, well, it's like a wall, and I'm going to use the part of the data that's like a wall. It's the old blind man and the elephant story, where the big organizations, they have so many people looking at it that they're getting so many descriptions that it's hard to see it as an elephant. It's just, I'm getting a lot of descriptions. There's ropes and there's spears and there's walls, and what do we make of it? And so I think I'm very encouraged by what small organizations, mid-sized organizations can do with data. I think that's awesome. I think they can be more agile. I think in a lot of ways that's the future of business, is small, even within large companies, is small entrepreneurial teams, or divisions that can go out and say, you know what, we don't want all of your data. We want data that is useful to us and that our stories tell us is meaningful.
Yeah. Well, and even at a small level, to your point, it seems to me you're not going to have that level of scale, but you start locally if you're a small business, and if you have good information coming out of Google Analytics, and you know who's coming to your website, and you really look at the data, you're probably going to know what was meaningful to people to get them to click on a story, or what they're looking at on your website, and you're going to be able to really see what topics, what titles, what emotional kind of things that you have that's driving that traffic, and be able to say, all right, more of these, because that is probably the trend, more of what people want. It's not going to be the same scale as GE, which scares me to think about, but it's a starting point for smaller businesses to start to think about being improvisational with, just story clouds. Map out what story.
Right, find a local story cloud. And by local, that doesn't have to mean geographically local. It has to mean local in terms of interest, local in terms of something, your immediate network that you're starting with. So you can be global in reach, but local in focus in this day and age. Who would have thought it? So and I think the ways that we want our clients to think small first is really to try a lot of things and see what's working, and get the data back from that, and let that data help you improve your story, because here's the thing about data. 1 and 13 are just two numbers, and it really depends on how 1 and 13 relate to each other. What kind of story? Do we have to go through all the numbers to get there? Is 13 the odd number out? Is 13 is 1/2 of 13? There's a million ways to look at the relationship of those two digits, those two alphanumerics as data. And only when you tell a story, or put a story in play, or go, this is the kind of story that we see ourselves participating in, where you go, well, 1 and 13 are like best friends. They're part of the same family, and and then you start to see, okay, now I can start to identify other members of the family based on that. Now we've got something going, because now we're talking about a certain kind of relationships that have data associated with them. And so bring me all the 1s and all the 3s now, and and then now we're in business, and now something is happening. Also, stories, you can't, as an improviser, you can't begin with the full story worked out. So which is to say, we don't want all those relationships to live into projections that are supposed to carry 2 years out. We don't actually, that's a burden for us as improvisers.
I don't even think that's possible today. Is it possible?
I don't think so. I don't see how. I was talking about this yesterday with some students, and 3 years sounds like way too long. And I used to be 5-year projections and business plans, and I just don't see the point. I think that's just a wank. And let's keep it at 18 months, 2 years, the outside. I like to work in 6-month increments and take really good stock at 6 months.
Yeah. We don't like to make long-term commitments to our, we have commitment issues. No, you're right.
Well, I think everything is going the way of the entertainment business. I think it's the model for businesses, and the entertainment business is always behind the curve from a technology standpoint. I think they've just they've identified the model that can work. And so it's project-based work.
Yeah. If
you get a hit, as in if your brand takes off, it could be it could be a lifetime annuity. It could be your Happy Days or your Mad Men or whatever, your Maid, if you get one of those hits, but everybody goes into it knowing, hey, it's just an audition, I might not get the role. Or if I get the role, well, it could be just a pilot. Or if you get the first season order, if it's a TV show, well, it's just a season, and I can take care of my family. And you can look at the entertainment business and you go, it's sustained generations of people with that model, but you have to take care, you have to honor those employees. You can't treat them like just so much gristle and human lubricant in some big machine, which is what, again, if you just operate with data, and somebody's sitting at a dashboard going, we got to lose 20% of the workforce. I don't care which 20%, or whatever.
Got into those skinny jeans, our big data.
Exactly, right. We're buying new pants for everybody, and not everybody's going to be able to fit them.
Well, no, and it strikes me you're so right about that, because I mean the math I think in the VC community I heard is about 1 in 7, 1 in 8, and it works the same way. It's like you're going to get a hit. Maybe 7 things aren't going to work out, but that one runaway hit is going to more than offset these other things. But it's game theory, and you're playing the odds. But stories change, and you're right. Stories are like blips on an EKG monitor. They come and go, and it's very fast moving. And you're right. I don't think you can plan for 5 years out of stories because.
Well, look at the Red Cross. So if you were at the Red Cross right now, and you're sitting there one day just feeling pretty good about yourself, kids just got out of school, you're talking about the vacation to Kings Island or someplace or wherever and go see the grandparents. And all of a sudden NPR breaks a story, blindsides you, and you look like the biggest, crookedest charity next to FIFA in the world. You have just taken over FIFA's role as a corrupt organization. How did that happen? It's because the data and the story got out of sync. And so somebody's got data that they only built 6 houses with $400 million or whatever it was. That's where the Red Cross did not tell a story of what happened after raising that money, which was they had to improvise. Because there were issues like cholera and drinking water and healthcare that became more important and gained in priority on the ground. And, it's hard to get people to go there. So there's probably money that's still banked, because I noticed they're still trying to fill open positions. But their storytellers just let it go, and the reality took off and got away from them. And now people are pulling data. They're finding stories in the data because the Red Cross is not generating new data with new stories, which is we had to stop the cholera or the housing wouldn't have mattered because there'd be nobody to live in these places. Or whatever it is, or we had to get the drinking water going before and use temporary shelters until, and that would have never been a story that NPR could have broke on the data. So they looked at data and they extracted a story that was useful to them, which is we're going to blow the Red Cross wide open. That friendly thing that you thought was so great, we're going to tell you how corrupt it is. Perfect news story for the nerds at NPR.
Absolutely. And that's a perfect example of lacking emotional context and meaning.
Right.
that once you explain, okay, we couldn't disperse the funds because we had to fight infection and disease first.
Yeah. And I'm mostly making that up, I have to say. But I got to believe that they just didn't take $400 million and build 6 houses and everybody bought private jets. That didn't happen. So again, our sense of story tells us there's something missing here.
Yeah, no, that's a
the
perfect
Red
example.
Cross is just not embezzling money at that scale, at a United Way scale. Sorry, United Way. Sure, you do great work with the NFL. Another great organization.
Thank you for the last episode of. No,
we love the United Way. We love the NFL. We love FIFA. We love the Red Cross.
That's right. That's
right. Well, we find things to love anyway.
We do. No, but that's a really great example of where the data and the story get out of sync, because we think that the data always drives the story because that's what we've been trained to think. But there are times where the data says one thing and the emotional context needs to be there because it doesn't quite explain.
And let me tell you another way, because this is dimensional. So it's not just a wave, one wave that's getting out. It's a series of waves that kind of collapse, quantumly speaking, at a time that is, and with an outcome that is not desirable for the Red Cross. The other one was, I believe, that the living story and their practice of storytelling got out of sync. I believe that nobody was on top of what was actually going on in Haiti. They kind of left it.
Yeah.
And so the last story that anybody had that the Red Cross was telling was this story that we're telling to raise money. Yeah. And they quit telling a story of what they were doing, which, as we know, is much more important to the health of the organization, to your authenticity. And they're getting busted on their lack of authenticity, I think, more than anything. I think that's really where the NPR story hit home, is you guys are being really disingenuous about what you're doing with that money. Like, there's a story here that you're not telling us, and the people that donated $400 million deserve that story. Mm-hmm. They're not going to be pissed off if you're diverting the money, because whether you built 6 houses or 6,000 houses is not going to solve the problem you were dealing with cholera.
Yeah.
But let us know what's going on. And I think that's kind of a new thing. Like, that's the FIFA thing, and all, what John Oliver has been on about FIFA is more about, you guys are old school. This doesn't cut it. You can't cut that much off the top. We understand if, your daughter gets a great graduation gift because or something, or a car changes hands here and there, but the graft and these stadiums being built that have no use after 2 weeks of it's terrible.
Yeah. No, and that's a good example. I wanted to go back to the example that we hadn't gotten there, but you mentioned Procter and Gamble, and for curiosity's sake, how did they use it, and what were the results of using BigSTOry for them as an organization?
Well, I want to say they're not, even though I did work for Procter & Gamble way back when, and hated it because, well, they put me, I was right out of
Procter & Gamble products.
Look, nothing against Procter & Gamble. I'm an admirer, but they put me in what I call the most appropriately named town in the United States, Effingham, Illinois, right out of college. And the last place that
Uh-oh. We froze there. Mike,
oh, there we go.
There we go. See, Procter & Gamble is big data eavesdropping right now.
Watching.
And
they shut it down. They shut it down. We don't want to hear your cockamamie Procter & Gamble story. Okay, we get it, P&G. We're going to move on. I'm not going to tell the story.
Well, let's talk about then.
Let's talk about the case study.
Yeah, let's talk about the case study. That's what I'd like to focus in on.
Yeah. So the last Winter Olympics, you'll remember that Procter & Gamble's campaign was Proud Swims, and that they ran this beautiful 2-minute spot, Hollywood quality filmmaking. I believe one of the Mexican directors that's prominent right now, Inarritu or someone like that, directed it. And it was about what it's like to be a mom of a world caliber athlete from the time they're very young and they're first learning to skate or ski. They did it also in the Summer Olympics, so swim or play baseball or any of that. And it was an homage to mothers, to the hard work, to the tears, to fixing the meals for the team, to dropping off kids when it's still dark in the morning for practice. And you see these children failing and crashing and falling for a long time. And then they start to come around, and boom, the payoff in the last 30 seconds is these are the Olympic athletes. Like, and the mother, nobody's happier, more rewarded than these moms who have been there the entire time, more present than anyone else. And right at the end, in maybe 5 seconds, it flashes a dozen Procter & Gamble product logos. There had been some products as props throughout this, but it was never about the product. And I know you talk a lot about this.
Yeah.
It's not about the product.
Yeah.
And so what they were doing according to our framework is they were expressing a theme that they know has a lot of story energy. And that theme, you could call it mothering young athletes. And that theme has more story energy. Think about the living story as we're speaking right now. Mothers around the world are taking care of young athletes. They're fixing meals and taking them to practice and cheering for them and patching them up and all of that. And the genius of what Procter & Gamble did was they placed a really smart bet when all of those moms and all of those young athletes were going to be watching. And then they're able to stir that up across social media. That's a very lively conversation. People relate to it. So I have a saying, participation is the most powerful form of persuasion. Mm-hmm. And that's really what they were doing at a very visible moment. It was a big bet because it's Procter & Gamble, and global, and pulling from 15 different product category budgets or brand budgets to do this. But it was, according to their research, the most successful advertising campaign in the entire 160-year history of the company.
Wow.
It was, or 100, I think 1880s is when they started roughly in Cincinnati. And so 130 years. And the conversions, the awareness, the reputation of all of it, the retention, all of those metrics were off the charts, including the ROI in terms of product sales and what each of the brands got from it, even though each of the brands was a tiny little blip. So they wanted their brands participating in stories, not telling a story. This was not a story in which Pampers is the hero of the Olympic moment. No, Pampers was just there way back when. The kids' laundry got done with the soap that just happened to be in there. It was Procter & Gamble soap, but we were there. And so remember that we've been on your journey with you, like you have been on your journey with your child. Keep us in mind the next time you're in the store. Remember that's us. And it was genius. And so I think in terms of how we want our clients to think about story clouds, that's a story cloud, mothering young athletes. It was so effective, and the boundaries were so clear that there was a protest by dads of young athletes, single fathers. And I don't know this, but I would guess that Procter & Gamble played along with that. Like, don't think that you made a giant mistake. Go, okay, let's just expand the cloud.
Yeah. And
let's play along with that. And you're welcome, join us. It's not just mothering, it's parenting young athletes.
Absolutely. And more, it's more fodder for story.
Yeah, absolutely.
If there's one thing as we kind of wrap up here, what's one thing that people could think of if you were going to say, look, here's one piece of advice to think differently about the stories in your business. And it's not necessarily about, BigSTOry and our services, but just in general, if you could give people one piece of advice to think differently about it and the quantumness, if you will, of their stories, what would you advise people to do? What's one thing they can think differently about?
Participate in the existing stories in the world that you believe in and that are most likely to shape your future.
Well said. Well said.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I love it. I could go on with you because it's so much fun to talk to you and you have such great stories and I love hearing your stories.
I hope so. My God, we're professionals.
Yeah.
Okay. I have
Yeah.
down here big jeans, grandpa's pants, and I've
Yep.
got another one, mchammerpants.com. I think we could go for that.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
big data, room for your data in our pants is, we're really on to something. I think we should drop whatever we're doing and just go all in.
I think we should. I think it's probably already taken, but post Thanksgiving dinner pants.com or elastic pants.
That's an obvious one.
That's I mean, yeah.
Clown pants. You know, Ringling Brothers locked up clown pants a long time ago.
Story cloud pants?
Story cloud pants. I gotta sign off now. I gotta jump on to GoDaddy real quick.
There you go. Well, before we do go, very quickly, Mike, you are so much fun to talk to. Where can people find you? So maybe give a shout out to your URL or your Twitter handle that you want to send people to.
Sure. So bigstory.biz, B-I-Z, is our URL, and it's got the Twitter and all of that on it. Big Story Biz is the Twitter handle. We have very few. Bonifer has more, and I can route you there. So there's always that. Say hi on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. Say hi, everybody. We're going to be in, and anybody that's in DC that happens to see this, Jeremy, my partner, and I are going to be in DC all next week, and we have 2 workshops that if you that have a few spaces open. We're just doing an introduction to Big Story and quantum storytelling inside the Beltway. The Beltway, the Big Pants Beltway.
It all comes, it arcs.
It
it's
just comes back.
It
in
does.
the hands of professional improvisers, ladies and gentlemen. Anything.
We just
That's
did and scene. And thank you, Mike. And
thank you, Kathy. It was fun.
My pleasure. And I'm your host, Kathy Klotz-Guest, everybody. You can see me at keepithuman.com and at Kathy Klotz-Guest, no hyphen. We try to keep things human around here. Mike, before we let you go, any final joke or anything, any funny thing that you've heard this week?
A joke or a funny thing that I've heard? Well, I mean, jargoneria is the funniest thing I've heard this morning, because I was looking at your Google Plus profile and they go, jargoneria? That's awesome. So I would just take that one if I were you. And I'm a... Go
on. I'm not going to stop you.
Yeah, no, I think that I have a collection somewhere of neologisms of these fresh words. Hang on. I will see if I can find it real quick, and then I will recite, because you reminded me of the. Here we go. I have a neologies. Actually, I have a neologies file, and I just updated it recently because I was in Central America with a group of people from Mesa Research, which I'm new to. I had heard about them for years, and I'm new to them, and they are awesome. And so we were talking and laughing about some of the neologisms, the new words, and I'm trying to find the document here. This is really funny.
Well, while you're doing that, I will recycle a joke that I used with Brian Kramer last week, and he told me a joke, and the one that just made me giggle was, if you're ever attacked by a group of clowns, go for the juggler. So that's my silly joke. That's my silly joke of the day.
That is sweet. That is sweet. Okay, so there's, of course, infobesity is a good one.
Yes.
And a lot of these, infobesity is great. Let's see here. I made a lot of these up. Joe bobbing is bobbing your head in time to a tune on your headphones. Joe bobbing.
Don't confuse the two. They're totally different.
To meagle is to look up your own name on Google. So you're meagling. I think, you know, maybe these are used. Oh, I have monologueria. So that can be like jargoneria. That's awesome. So monologueria is using, you know, just talking on and on, like I sometimes do. And then Mr. Lincolnated is stiff and rehearsed, a performance repeated verbatim, like the Mr. Lincoln audio animatronic at Disneyland. Mr. Lincolnated, ladies and gentlemen.
I think we have to end there because I don't think anything tops that. And
wear your clown pants. Wear your clown pants, everyone.
Everybody
clown
have
pants.
Clown pants and skinny jeans and all those great things. Have a wonderful Friday, everybody. And Mike, thank you so much for playing with me today.
Thanks, Kathy. Bye-bye. Talk to you soon.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.